Welcome to part 20 of Art Lounge here on Twitch. I'm your host. I will be continuing figure drawing basics. And I'd like to begin today by doing a review since we had like a weekend to rest. So it's good to just start out by remembering some things right before you start getting drawing. The number one thing, and let's just flip to it. I do like starting with this page because it has some pretty good examples. This page right here. So, the very first thing, you guessed it, is drawing lightly. You don't want to press hard. You don't want to teach yourself that bad habit. You want to get yourself like a little sketchbook like this. This is something I mention pretty much every review. I think it's really important. It gives you guys opportunities to just practice throughout the day, wherever you are, whether you're at work, whether you're at home, in a different room, or wherever it is that you could just pull this out. And at times when you're like bored and you just kind of feel like doing something kind of mindless, even when you're watching TV, sometimes I find myself like not really paying attention and just thinking about drawing and stuff. So it's cool to just have it there. Pull it out. Try to practice these gradations. Try to practice keeping it loose throughout the entire time and just gradually going from highlights to midtones to shadows, which is what you see right here. And also on the object itself. So if you're doing, let's say, a circle, you could just fill it in with the same ideas, highlights, midtones, and shadows. And just do it as gradually as you can. This is an example of doing it without actually following the curvature. You're just doing it straight up and down. Just making sure that the gradation is pretty smooth. This is something you shouldn't do, but you can always fix. If you happen to do it this way, you notice how it's very stark difference between the highlights, midtones, and shadows. You want to smoothen that out, and you could just go back to each one in between those partitions, I guess, and just smoothen it out so that it's not noticeable, and have it come out to be something like this. You don't have to press hard. You could just go over the area over and over again until it gets gradually darker. Think of it as just like layering. You're putting another color, another until it just gets darker. Then we have other objects that you could do the same thing, which is the cylinder shape. Notice how the shading is different in comparison to the ball. It's side to side as opposed to up and down. And this is something that a lot of beginners and even students that I had in drawing classes do this mistake. We were talking about drawing highlights, midtones, and shadows. They would do the same thing, but in the direction as the ball. For example, they would just do midtones, highlights, midtones, and shadows in this order. And as you can see, that just doesn't look right unless you're drawing liquids inside of it. This is like a glass rather than like a cylinder solid shape. And you could practice the light source by getting yourself like a nice swivel lamp and getting a can of some sort, having like paper, like white paper, go all the way around it, and then put it up to the light source and see how the shadows form around it, because sometimes metallic could be a little bit more challenging for beginners. So if it's like a can, it could be a little bit more intimidating. If you just tape white paper going all the way around it and then have it sit in front of the light source, you could see how it gradually goes around the object itself. It's a good way to practice, good way to notice shadows. Yeah, so the other thing you want to keep in mind is don't hold the pencil close to the tip. Don't give it the death grip. Both of those things encourage a very rigid and meticulous, like you're really going into every little detail, and you don't want to do that in the beginning. In the beginning, you want to make sure it's light, you're getting the shapes down, you're getting the form down. You're basically you know, in terms of, let's just say, let's use the metaphor for building, right? When you're building a building, you don't start laying the bricks and designing the house right away. You first have to lay down the beams. So in drawing, it's the same process. You're laying down the beams, you're creating these very basic outlines, parameters to work within, so that, you know, you don't go out of proportion once you do start going into detail. Let's say you start drawing the arm or the shoulder, and then by the time you go all the way around, you notice that it's really broad arm. But if you keep it light and you sketch out the forms, you create these beams, this blueprint basically, you're allowing yourself to avoid those kind of mistakes, avoid distortion, avoid disproportion, all those things. It's really beneficial, and again, you're teaching yourself to keep it light, because essentially throughout the entire process from start to finish, you could just maintain very light grip on a pencil and get excellent results. And that's just usually the outcome of it. When you start getting really tight on the pencil and you're really pressing down on the paper, you know, holding it to its tip, that's when you know you're going to start making very rigid lines and very like cut sort of imagery. You want to kind of avoid that. It's going to be a pleasant experience. You'll be able to draw longer. Your fingers and your hand isn't going to be exhausted from the amount of pressure you're putting on a pencil. So all these things, there's a couple, you know, just to give a brief overview: keeping it light, not holding it close to the tip, not giving it the death grip, and sketching out. Those things are extremely important that you teach yourself from the beginning. And even if you're intermediate and you haven't really thought about those things, it's a great time to start training yourself out of it. That's what I kind of had to do. You know, I originally, and this is how I know this turns out to be a disaster, is I did that when I was drawing. I didn't really pay attention to those things, and the only thing I thought about, or the only thing that mattered to me, was the outcome. How's it going to look? But the process itself, I didn't really think about it at all. And I found that, you know, doing more and more work, trying to get faster, trying to get better results, trying to enjoy the process, and get better results required me to keep all those things in mind. And you'll find that a lot of artists would agree as well. It is a really beneficial, these are all really beneficial habits that you want to teach yourself. So great way to do it, using the sketchbook. Gradations allow you to keep those things in mind while doing something very simple and almost mindless. You know, so those are excellent exercises, stretches that you can have before you start drawing. Then just a quick overview of the human figure. This is chapter 1 that we were going over. We're in chapter 2 now. I think no matter what chapter you're on, it's always excellent to come back to this, you know, solidify it more in your mind. Every day you think about it, every day you are reciting this, just like the alphabet. When you learn to read, you just got better and better. Right now at this point, you don't have to recite the alphabet. You don't have to think about all the letters and sentence structures. You just read. You kind of know what's going on, and you did that through repetition, through doing it daily, keeping it in mind, practicing, exercising those things. So the same idea comes to this. This is what we're doing right now. We're just exercising all this stuff and reminding ourselves to keep it in mind so that it becomes less and less of a challenge to draw the human figure and to keep things in proportion. So starting off here, we got the torso, 2 heads across for the width, 2 heads down for the height, 3 heads across if you include the shoulders, and still 2 heads down for the height. We got the head that's almost the same size as the foot. Foot's a little bit bigger. The front 2 toes are longer, so they kind of jut out. They go past the head. The hand is about 3/4 the size of the head. And all these things are important when you are foreshortening as well. For example, when you're drawing the foot and it's further back from the body, let's say it's further away from the camera rather than closer, you need a base. You need to start somewhere, right? So understanding this allows you to have a basis for the size of the foot. So when you're drawing it smaller, it's going to be smaller, much smaller than the size of the head. And the same thing for the other direction. If it's going closer towards the camera, you want to start from somewhere and then just gradually grow it from there. So if your foot is a lot smaller or about the same size as the size of the head, but the perspective is it's coming closer to the viewer, coming closer to the camera, then something is off. Then you know. So this kind of helps understand foreshortening better as well, because there aren't, as far as I know, there aren't really that many precise guidelines as there are here. You know, for a front shot, let's say a very flat sort of view of the body, there aren't that many. You could use the basic shapes of like a cube and a cylinder and form your figure within that, but you still have to kind of shape it according to these guidelines. So going on to the leg, you got 2 heads for the height, 1 head for the width. Then for the bottom part of the leg, it's 3/4 the size of the head as far as the width goes, and then 2 heads for the height. Notice how it starts off at the starts off wide and then tapers down towards the base for both the top part of the leg and the second half of the leg. That's something just to keep in mind. You know, when you're practicing cylinder shapes, you could take it to the next level and start really focusing on trying to follow the anatomy of the body as well using the cylinder shape. Just step by step, getting better and better. All right, moving on to the other parts of the body. To simplify it more, right, we're going to just go for this right here, 4 heads for the top part of the body, 4 heads for the bottom part of the body. That's 8 heads altogether. There are 7 heads, but the only difference is the top part of the leg. In the 7-head body, it's only 1 head height and 1 head width. That's about the same. The only difference is that it's only 1 head for the height of the top part of the leg as opposed to 2 heads. Everything else is the same. The bottom part of the leg, the body, everything other than that is the difference for the 7-head figure. But this is the 8-head figure. So 4 heads for the top, 4 heads for the bottom. Then to break it down a little bit more, once you start getting into detail, it's 2 heads for the top part of the body. From the chin down to the chest, that's 2 heads. And then from, 1 head is obviously the one you drew. And then from the chin down to the chest, that's 2 heads. Then from chest down to the waist, that's 3. And then from the waist down to the groin, that's 4. Important detail to keep in mind is the wrist area. Don't want to finish the fingers right at the groin area. The fingers of the hand should be well past, I'd say about, 3/4 the size of the height of the head. Let's do like a little measurement there. I got this excellent ruler, very cheap. It was I got it for $1 at a dollar store. It's not extremely durable, obviously, but you get all these different types of rulers, and there's many more. There's like 4 more in addition to these right here, but they've all had their use. You know, this right here was excellent. All these plus like 2 or 3 more was like $1. So take a look at your dollar store, see if you could find something similar. These are very useful, especially because they're see-through. So right, going back to where the fingers are, I'd say like 3/4. That's about right. 3/4 the size of the head. So like the same size as the hand. That's the distance between the groin area and the fingers. So that's a good way to remember it. It's like a good hand's height distance from the groin. And that's a really important detail because sometimes, even at intermediate and maybe some advanced, I've seen where their arms are, or the hands are really short, or the arms are really short, and they just go to just right about where the groin is. Maybe just a little bit past, but in this example, you could see he goes pretty much past it. So moving on to the legs, it's the same idea. It is 2 heads for the top, 2 heads for the bottom, like we discussed here. But this just shows how you really could just summarize it, make it more easier to remember in a sense by just making sure that chat is open properly. Yeah, you could just make it easier by summarizing it this way, and just it's a visual aid. You could see how similar all this is. You don't have to think like, oh, are there 3 heads for the legs? No, it's pretty much divided into 2 and 2 for both parts of the body. So for the wrist area, the width of the wrist, there's something that we didn't discuss on here. It is half the head. So no matter what size head you draw on the paper, that's going to be your unit of measurement for everything else. And once you draw that, make sure you draw the line going down the middle, all the way through, as far as you want. Because that's going to help you determine things like that, the wrist width, and also it's going to be a visual aid to make sure that your left and right side are exactly the same in terms of width, in terms of height. Sometimes when you don't have that, it becomes a little bit more tedious. You have to do a lot more erasing when you're just beginning to learn how to draw. So this kind of makes it a little bit easier, a little bit better for you to notice, like, whoops, I drew the left side a little too wide in comparison to the right. They should be about the same. And you do want to use the head as a unit of measurement while you're doing all that to make sure everything is in proportion. So going to the hip is a head and a half width, and 1 head, just like the forearm, 1 head for the height. So it's just simplified things. This is something like, okay, we are talking about it and you are seeing this as a visual aid and you could remember it, but remember, nothing is better than being able to actually practice it physically. It's one thing to understand it, one thing to see it. It's another thing to make your hand be able to do these lines, to follow the curvature. Think of it as like when you're exercising, you're not, your muscles aren't trained enough to lift heavy weights, or your muscles aren't trained enough, let's say, for you to be able to touch your toes when you're stretching. So you have to just do it physically, gradually, little by little, in order to be able to do that, in order to achieve it. So it's the same idea here. Your muscles, your hand, isn't trained enough, isn't flexible enough to do these lines, even though you understand these concept, even though you get like, okay, it's 4 heads for the body. It's another thing for your hand-eye coordination to be trained as well. So all of that kind of comes together when you practice and you draw it over and over again. And as you see, I've done it multiple times in this book. Well, it's a little further on, but there's pages filled with it here as well. It's the same idea kind of drawn out across. Once isn't enough. It's a great reference, but I've done it over here as well. You just have to keep doing it as practice, as your stretches. Let's say when we're talking about exercising, these are your stretches. The practicing the gradations, practicing how to draw the circle. Right here is just an example of how important it is. And here as well, when you don't draw the head proportionately when you don't draw the circle as a circle, and you just quickly go over it. You just do a quick circle shape. You know, it could be oblong, it could be wide, it could be like a football shape, it could be like a seed shape, or it's not even a circle, it's kind of like an oval egg shape. All of that ends up costing you in the long run because the entire body is measured using that head, so you end up having a narrow body, right? As we mentioned, the width of the body is 3 heads, so if you're using this narrow head as the unit of measurement, then you're going to get a narrow body, and everything else is going to look like it's been stretched out. And then examples of what happens when you don't draw the line down the middle. You get this like tilted kind of body, which doesn't look stable. It looks like a unstable drawing. It looks stiff. It looks uncomfortable. Like, who stands in that sort of posture, in that position? Especially in this sort of stance, where the hands are just straight down. Or just in general, even if it's another pose, but the entire image is kind of tilted, it's not good. You know, it's showing that you are lacking that understanding, the balance of the figure, the stability of the structure of the figure, or the structure, if you want to use metaphors. You know, you don't want to build a building that's leaning to the left because it just looks like it's about to collapse. So the same thing here. It just looks like he's about to just tilt over. Granted, it might be useful in certain panels if you're talking about comics, you're talking about actions or scenes or whatnot, but first, make sure you're able to do it right before you play around with it. Here's examples of people not paying attention to proportions of the body, where they draw the torso, let's say, to the same size as the head, but then they don't use the unit of measurement to recognize the right proportion of the arm. So you can see this is a huge arm as opposed to the body. And eventually, you know, you might think like, oh, why do I have to, am I going to just continuously draw these guidelines? That's annoying. That's not what art is about. That's not what a drawing is about. Remember, you're training yourself. You're teaching yourself good habits. And just like the alphabet, you won't have to recite it. Your eye is just going to be able to recognize this looks off. And when you do measure it after, let's say you draw it, right, just from eyeing it, because you've practiced it so much, it'll come out to be proportionate. You'll measure the head and you'll be like, oh, look, I just got it. I didn't even have to do this whole, you know, making sure everything is right. It is just going to happen for you, and it's going to work out. But for now, you want to train your eye to be able to see these proportions, to be able to see these anatomical parts in relation to each other properly. So this is why it's important to just start out by using these guidelines, sketching lightly, and all that other stuff we talked about. This is an example of practicing the cylinder shape, which is great. It's essential. It pretty much represents most parts of the body. But you don't want to draw it flat. You actually want to start giving it that tapering. So what we were talking about before, starts out wide, tapers off more towards the bottom, towards the base. Important principle, you know, something to keep in mind as you go through the process of drawing. So that pretty much sums up a lot of the really important parts of chapter 1. Again, if you guys have any questions or comments, you know, things that you want to discuss further, or you want better ideas of, leave it in the comments. I'll write about it, or I'll talk about it again in the stream. But yeah, for now, I think that pretty much covers it. You know, there's other stuff that we talked about, like the range of motion. That's something that you guys can revisit in other chapters in the stream, in other parts of the stream, where they just talk about how, you know, once again, you drawing it is really important because you understand the limits of the body. For example, here, if you could even test this out for yourself. You know, in this drawing, it demonstrates how far your foot can actually travel back without the assistance of anything. So if you lift your foot up and you're in this position, you're standing straight, not holding on to anything, not leaning to the back or the front. You're standing straight. and you lift your leg up, this is as far as it can go. This arm right here demonstrates how far it can go up in the position that it's in, meaning palm facing down. So palm facing down, palm facing down. This is about as high as it'll get. Once you rotate it towards, let's say, your head, then it becomes, you get more range of motion. You can go further up, straight up, and you could connect your palms together. But in this position where the palm is facing down, this is about as far as it could go. Same thing for the leg here. If you keep it straight, you don't bend it, and you try to see how far back it can go, it's about this much. This is the range of motion for your leg. And this isn't something that changes from person to person. It's pretty much for everybody, unless they're like a yogi, you know, they're able to like stretch their legs and arms in different ways. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're just talking about everyday people, just the average starting point, let's just say, for everyone is based on this limitation. Same thing for the front. You could see that towards the back it's limited, towards the front it's further up. And we pretty much know this, right? We understand this all. We could even test it out for ourselves, but it's another thing to be able to draw this stuff. And this circle just kind of shows how and why it's important to include it is because it's setting your limit for anatomy, for example. So once it gets here, this allows you, the circular shape allows you to understand how far out or how far back you have to draw it. Because if you don't include it, you might draw it a little bit further out, or you might draw it too short, you know. So this kind of this guideline gives you that limit in either direction. So yeah, this is just a brief overview of our range of motion and limit of range of motion. And these are just demonstrations of how the limbs kind of fall into each other. You know, how we're just able to understand the joints, you know, where the socket and the ball and socket locations are. You're just drawing them out. It's more drawing out, more solidifying the image we have of the human body in our mind to make it easier to reference. You know, so we could reference and we could be like, oh yeah, this is what the body is like when you're bending it or whatever else. All this is just practice for exactly that, to solidify your ability to visualize it in your mind and connect it to your hand. You know, the hand-eye coordination, not just externally but internally in your mind, to connect both your hand and your mind. Just more demonstrations of that. This is something we'll cover on the next review, and just using the cylinder shape to draw the figure in all sorts of directions while practicing the proportions. So more stretching, more exercising. Think of it as like next level exercises. Once you understood these principles, now it's time to use them in practice and see how you can just sketch out the figure using them. So we started with chapter 2, and we were talking about different parts of the arm. Again, these are visual aids. All this stuff allows you to think of the body three-dimensionally. You're able to visualize it better, even when it's animated in your head. So, you know, when you're twisting your arm, for example, you'll know, oh, it's this muscle that turns inwards. So when I'm drawing the detail and I wanted to make, give the drawing more detail, give the arm more detail, you don't necessarily have to draw all the ligaments, but you can make suggestions, like similar to here. These lines are there just to show that this area is the cheekbone. This is like where the skeletal structure cheekbone is. So the same idea here. You don't have to draw all these ligaments and lines all the way through. you could just make little suggestions and it'll be correct because you know where these muscle groups are. You know that right here is the division between one muscle and the other, the division between the extensor carpi radialis and the supinator longus. So just keeping that in mind, it allows you to, like, they're using it here and feathering, to imply this is where the muscle is, similar to how it is here. You could see that John Buscema drew he understood anatomy so well that when he makes these shadows, they make sense, or it just looks right to the eye. Even if you're not an artist, we just have this ability to recognize human parts or distinguish human parts to just understand things better visually. So even if you're not trained, you could look at the body and be like, oh, that's really well done. That's great. That's great anatomy. They're able to really capture all the different parts of the muscle. And he didn't draw out all the ligaments, right? Notice it's not every single line of all the muscle groups and everything. He just made a suggestion and you already know, okay, that's like where the tricep is. But he didn't draw it further down. He didn't draw it close to the elbow. He didn't draw it closer to the bicep. And the reason why is because he understood all the muscle groups in the arm to avoid those mistakes. So that's the benefit. I used to argue with myself about it and be like, oh, what's the point? Why are you going to learn these like medical terms and draw these medical examples of the arm? It's just like, those are just ego strokes for people to say, I know a lot. But really, it's there to help you be able to draw these parts correctly. Or if you wanted to include shadows or details, you'd know where to do it. You know how to do it. And these terms, even though they might be intimidating and you might not be able to pronounce them or whatever, if you learn them, it just allows you to recognize in your studies where these muscles are and how they interact with each other. So for example, because you know where the extensor carpi radialis is on the back view, if you draw it from the side view, you'll know, oh, okay, this is the extensor carpi radialis coming inwards because the hand is twisting more. So this is where this muscle will show, or I know that this is where the extensor carpi radialis is. Let's look at the supinator longus and see if we could draw like a little shadow underneath the arm to show that muscle. So it just becomes ways to distinguish and recognize their location in other views. So we got front view, back view, side view, side back view. You could just figure them out. If you don't know what the muscles are, what they're named, or where the locations are, it's harder for you to do that. And that's why when you look at these, you're just like, oh, too much info. It becomes overwhelming. But grasping these things, grasping these ideas, don't be intimidated by them. They're there to help you distinguish themselves from each other, so that you know how to draw them in different types of views. So yeah, we kind of got into that. We got more into each view and labeling each one of them. And again, it's much better to draw this out. I was just bringing this up and I drew this as an example to show you why it's important to actually study these, to take time to draw them and pay attention and look at it. You might be able to catch certain details and make certain lines that can transform your style, can transform your work to being even more studious, even more skilled, demonstrating greater understanding, to make it more interesting, that sort of thing. So yeah, this is pretty much for the arms. I'm gonna do one more example of the bone structure within the arms to even help understand the muscle groups as well. Like, why do they look a certain way when the arm is twisting, or when the arm is in this direction or that direction. This book has photographs demonstrating them, but the photographs aren't really that clear. Like the guy's muscles aren't really as prominent for you to be able to notice it. But what you do notice is certain muscles popping out because of the bone structure and how the arm is twisted. So you could see like the hand is twisted, sorry. So you could see each frame showing the hand in different positions and how that affects the muscles. Like in this position, you could really see the bicep pop out. In this position, when the thumb is facing upwards, you could see the radius bone more, or the muscles on the radius bone popping out more. In this position, there's another muscle right here that's showing. And as you could see, just from each one of them, depending on how the hand is positioned, you get the muscles popping out more in certain areas than others. You know, in this position, you could see like the tricep kind of popping out when the fist is tight and it's facing downwards. And then right around here, I'm going to say that's the extensor carpi radialis that's popping out right there, and where the elbow is. Yeah, these are all helpful to just look at, to draw, even to sketch out. There are books that are more into those specific muscles, that they show you where those muscles are, how they connect from the elbow, let's say, to the wrist. This book doesn't really go in too much detail into it. It pretty much just comes down to this. You know, it really moves on to like drawing the hands. But this is also something that you could gain from just drawing from life. You know, drawing the figure more, drawing from photo references, like real arms, not stylized ones, not from comic books, not from other illustrators, but really studying it yourself, getting one of these books and taking time to actually draw them out. So this is a pretty extensive review today because of that break on Sunday. I really wanted to just refresh your memory about everything that we've learned so far. I'm not going to get that much time to draw today for the Drawing Basics one. I'm going to try to sketch out this example of how the arm looks with the bone structures, etc. But I don't think that time is going to allow me to really get too into it. But as I mentioned earlier, if there are certain things that you'd want to hear more about on the stream when it comes to figure drawing, anatomy and such, leave it in the comments. I'll talk about it, and I'll find other references aside from the book if it's not in this book to explain it better. It's kind of hard to, I guess, explain why it's important to draw out these parts, other than just becoming more and more explainable in your mind. Yeah, I want to say maybe like Legos, for example, right? When you're looking at a finished piece, you're like, how does that all come together? You know, it might look intimidating when you see like a really well done Lego uh, structure, you know, one of those guys who builds like life-sized ones or whatever. But once you understand how all those pieces are connected to each other, you know, the internal workings of it all, it becomes more doable yourself, right? Like it's no longer a mystery. You're not like, you know, oh, how did that come all together? You're kind of aware of it, and you're able to start somewhere and shape it in a direction that you want it to be in. So it's kind of the same idea here, you know, when you are taking the time to learn all these different little aspects that create the human figure, it makes it easier for you to tackle it on your own time with your own projects. So that's at the moment, it's the best way I could explain, like why draw out all these like bones and you know, different parts of the body, etc. And the more you draw them, the easier it is to correct yourself. Really, that's another point. It's like you can, when you're drawing the fingers, for example, you know that there's bones inside, and you've drawn this diagram of like what the fingers look like. So you're like, my fingers are a little too narrow. Like, where are the bones? You know, if this is supposed to be muscle and bone, you know, this is too, let's say it's way too narrow, way too bony almost. So where's the room for the muscle? That sort of mind dialogue that you have with yourself also helps you make corrections, right? It's not a mindless experience when you're drawing. You're still thinking about things. You're like, well, how do the lips look like? You know, what do the arms look like? You're still thinking about it. So this kind of, it helps that process be more structured, easier for you to adjust things and correct things in order for it to look right. So as you can see, it's comprised of like the hands. It's comprised of 1, 2, 3. So once you get to the fingers, there's 3 bones, 3 joints that allow the full range of motion. You know, so that's 3 is 1, 2, 3, and then 4 is 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's what allows you, the 3 allow you to go to this extent, and then 4 is when you make the joint here is what allows you to make the fist. So the first 3 allow the curling of your fingers. The 4th on your knuckles allows you to make the fist tight. So again, another visual aid, right? When you're drawing the fist, and you understand that this rule of 3 when it comes to the finger and 4 to make a fist, then you could draw the knuckles according to it. Whereas some people, when they're drawing the fist, they're just like, I remember this is what it looks like in this perspective. So they're only limited to this perspective. They don't understand this principle of the fingers and joints for them to be able to draw it however they like in their imagination. You know, all they know is this angle, you know, that's what I've drawn over and over again. So these visual aids again help with 3-dimensional thinking, understanding the figure, so that when you do draw it, it makes sense. And you're not just restricting yourself to like one perspective or 2 perspectives, because that's how often you drew arms. or those are the only 2 or 3 perspectives I drew arms and hands in. So not just medical, this is what I'm getting at. It's not just medical, it's not just for people who want to do hyper-realistic work or really detailed work. It's even in simple drawings. You know, people who draw more simplified bodies and figures still understand these principles. And it just helps you in the long run. Like if you take the time to sit and practice all this stuff, in the long run, it becomes a lot easier for you to be able to do it from your imagination. You wrestle less with it because you like internally, the dialogue in your head is more aware of what's going on. You're like, well, that fist looks weird because, you know, I didn't include, let's say, the 4th joint, you know, where it actually does turn into a knuckle, it turns into a fist. You know, so for me to be able to draw that knuckle, I have to make sure that it follows that curve, you know, or even here, you know, for this to curve and then this to curve, instead of it just being the tip of the fingers cutting off here and you're just, you know, taking shortcuts or just not even realizing you're making that mistake. Yeah, so it becomes really useful to know all these things for those reasons. This is why I mentioned it's important to draw, like, especially if you're just starting out, 3 to 4 hours a day. Or just 2 hours even. You know, I think you'll cover a lot more ground because it'll give you time to practice, right? To like review all this stuff. And also to work on whatever it is that you originally sat down to do. So you want to give yourself enough time to practice, review, and to draw. To warm up and to draw. You know, expand your knowledge and draw your own stuff as well. So now I'm drawing the same arm, but the position has changed. Now it's twisting. Instead of it being like this, it's like this. And you could see how the bones are going to cross each other because of this motion. And because the muscles are attached to these bones, certain muscles are going to jut out more than the other ones, like you see on here. So this is like palm out, facing the viewer, and this is palm down, back of the hand. So palm side, back of the hand side. I'll just write that here. Palm out. Say palm in. Notice I'm giving it a mitten shape just to set myself parameters. Then I'm gonna use like French fries, kind of. We're gonna simplify it. Again, we're laying down the beams. So, and also notice how from the pinky to the index finger, there's curvature. It's not just straight across. You're not just making like a book shape for the hand. you want to give some curvature that starts out pretty low and then works its way gradually to a curve to the index finger, with the middle finger being the longest finger. So we're going to draw these bones here. And unfortunately, guys, after I finish this diagram, it's going to be it for drawing basics for today. I'm going to be moving on to drawing comics, which I'm sure you guys have seen from me flipping around in the sketchbook. I'm going to be drawing John Buscema's Conan the Barbarian. Legendary artist. Absolutely one of my favorites. Demonstrates anatomy excellent, and he is an example of being in between realism and comic book imagery. That's what I really like about his work, as well as Alex Raymond, who I also introduced last week. If you guys take a look at the history of the videos, you'll see that one of the episodes I'm introducing Flash Gordon, done by Alex Raymond, and it's a fun little episode just talking about his history and like what was going on at that time. Just showing you guys examples of his work and how he is also just another artist who is able to just skillfully demonstrate anatomy and face expressions, action, and all that without really crossing over into like hyper realism. You know, it still maintains like an imaginary and creative way of telling story, while not making it way too cartoonish. Not to say that that's bad. It's just, what are you looking for? You know, what are you more interested in? And to me personally, that is intriguing. I think that the human figure is beautiful. There's many beautiful lines and curves, so it's cool to see what somebody really grasps that as well. I will be showing this week as well, in new intros, other artists who've done beautiful work like that. I have a collection of pinups from the 50s, like various artists who were able to just draw like beautiful figures. It's the female figure, so be mature about it, guys. It is beauty. It's not just simply not sexualized or anything. I mean, there is that implication, but it's an artistic form. And it kind of plays a little bit on both like the artistic and slightly sexualized. To keep it a little fun. And as I mentioned, the human body and the human figure is beautiful. The female form is beautiful as well. It has beautiful curves, beautiful lines to draw. And a lot of these artists were able to capture them and capture that beauty with their work. So make sure you tune into that. I will be making that announcement. There's also going to be various other announcements that I'm excited to talk about. So it's going to be this Wednesday. Mark your calendar. I will be making some really cool announcements in ways that you guys can can participate in as well. It's still obviously a growing community, but it's going to be a way to actually get you guys more engaged and be part of the stream, besides just seeing these examples and lessons and just to make the streams even more diverse. I think it'll be some cool opportunities in the future. So check that out this Wednesday, 3 p.m. I'm probably going to be making the announcements throughout the day. It's not only just going to be 3 p.m. I'm also going to be doing it for the comic stream, for the project stream on Wednesday, and for the coloring comics stream on Wednesday as well. So if you're not there to tune in for the 3 p.m. one, you'll get a chance to also see what's new in the other streams as well. In the live streams, you could also always go back to them through the history on Twitch. It's an obvious one. But yeah, so this just shows, just wanted to demonstrate this. This might have been a little too much of a curve. But yeah, this demonstrates what the bones look like once they twist. So when it's open palm out, these bones right here, I'm gonna label it. I'm gonna say ulna is the way you pronounce it, or yulna. It's really complicated terms. And this one is radius. So this is the ulna again. And this is the radius. So the radius crosses over the ulna once the palm goes inwards, like away from the camera. And you'll see certain muscles really show up because they're all attached onto this bone. So when it starts to cross over, it just really starts to jot out within the limits of the skin. So this does it pretty much for the drawing, figure drawing session, guys. If you enjoy the content, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. Both go a long way to help the stream. Check out the social media. I'll be, like I mentioned, I'll be making some cool announcements to make it even more interesting this Wednesday. So tune in for that. And yeah, I'll be back in 5 minutes for drawing comics. I'll see you then.
out.